Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m, Wednesday, the 17th of November, and you are watching episode 30 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, syntropic farming, placate, the bureaucrats and their propensity for rampaging regulation, is my guest, Hawes. Jane is an Atherton tablelands farmer and has been involved in regenerative farming for more than a decade and has recently embraced some of the aspects of syntropic agriculture. At Petals in the Park, Tolga, Jane both practices and conducts syntropic agriculture courses. Jane also recently presented at the Chilumban Wild Information Night held in Cairns to highlight the impact on renewable projects on the natural environment. Jane is both a passionate and active advocate for the natural environment. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you, Bill.
If we could just start off with a bit of background, and we're just talking about a bit of interesting past history of your family. If you can give us a bit of background to your connection with the tablelands through the past and your current activities.
Yeah, my family, my dad's family were some of the original pioneers of this region, especially around Atherton. That they were the Hasties, my great-grandma, and then they set up many of the agricultural industries originally up here and employed numerous amounts of people, set up employment. So yes, from that background, they were responsible on deforestating a lot of the tablelands as well with sawmills. They set up, the milk, butter, the maize, and even vegetables crops back at that stage. I've been up on the tablelands all my life. I love it up here. My mum and dad, I come from a farming background right back 3-4 generations. So farming's in my blood. I love it. But how we can move forward on farming to integrate it that is healthier for the environment, how we can integrate trees into our system and balance the whole ecosystem and repair damage that has been done, because our soils are now becoming that depleted of life and minerals that they're near deserts that are left, when you leave a bare soil in near deserts. So that's why I took on syntropic agriculture after studying ag science down in Gatton. Then I also did numerous regenerative agricultural studies through mass humus and other biological methods. And then seeing syntropic agriculture, I went, wow, imagine if I put all of this knowledge, then add it into a system that works as an ecosystem, then everything can thrive.
It's just, the layman, it's sort of hard to imagine what you're talking about, describing the areas around Malanda, Atherton, and as sort of deserts. But it is noticeable once you sort of move from certain areas, the landscape changes dramatically from wet tropics to the dry tropics, and there is a big vast difference. Can the regenerative type farming also sort of work in all varieties of area? Because you're quite fortunate in Tolga, there's quite a reasonable rainfall and there is good soil, but you move away from there, say north of Mareeba, it does get a bit sort of scratchy and patchy sort of thing. Will it work equally as well in both places? Of course, with different emphasis as you go.
Yeah, because you're working with with the natural ecosystem as itself. We're even working systems. We've got systems working up in Watsonville that is a highly degraded ancient granite soils, some of the older soils on the tablelands. You pick them up and that you wouldn't even think they're soil. They just look like sand. And so up there, we're utilizing different kind, putting in the system, like there's no way you grow a banana in the system for your water. So we use agaves and cacti and things that would grow in that quite more near desert environment, and using native trees.
Can you help change the environment a little bit for it, sort of, so it has more moisture and that, and as time goes on, so
it will
you can
do
sort of
but
increase the range of what you're planting?
Yeah, you've got to start where it's already at, identify where your land's already at, and it will change as the more trees and more you actually draw in the moisture into the area. They're capable of actually creating a low pressure zone wherever there is trees, which draws down moisture from the atmosphere even into them. Trees actually create rainfall. And this is the issue when they talk about climate change or anything. Well, it's pretty simple. Just get more trees back onto the landscapes. We know what caused it, but there's not much talk about how do we fix this in the respect of trees onto the landscapes in an abundant form, because they'll talk climate change, but then they run down the ideal of, we'll have to do green energy or change our fuels and everything else. But what about the situation? We know what caused it. Let's get more trees in.
Well, actually, I was just thinking in regards to revegetation and that. Sometimes we want to get more vegetation, but it's also important to get the right sort of vegetation.
Totally.
When they had the Vegetation Management Act, basically the government's regulation even stops you from cutting back sort of regrowth. And I suppose when you're talking about put trees back, it's quality, not quantity. If you go up towards the Cape and that, you'll see in areas where there's heaps of vegetation and small seedlings and striplings, but they're all fighting each other for a chance to grow and be the boss of the area. Is it not just more trees? It's actually A, type of trees, and B, sensible numbers. It's not just sheer volume per acre.
Yeah, no, it's sensible management. Nature will already do over time, but not in our time frame, will rehabilitate a landscape, but it's nowhere going to be near in our time frame. So to speed that up, it's in responsible management of pruning and replanting trees, and not just one type of tree, but use trees that are already pioneers to that area, but then plant other species in there also that are capable of holding the water in that area, plus have other fruiting crops that attract more birds, then attract more bees, and the whole ecosystem. If we do a responsible management of it, the whole ecosystem just builds rapidly within a couple of years.
I'll just show a screen here. There's 5 principles for regenerative agriculture. Keep the soils covered, minimise soil disturbance, maximise crop diversity, maintain living roots in the ground year round, and integrate livestock.
Yeah, all of those are important.
So we've got to do all those things, and covering the ground to me seems fairly easy. You get the current vegetation, you do your pruning, and you put it on the ground. So that's to keep the moisture on, and so that's pretty simple for most people. But if you can talk to the other points.
On the diversity is key, because the maximum amount of diversity you have in there, then the maximum amount of different plants actually do different tasks or different roles, so the maximum amount of diversity you have in there, then we can have the a maximum amount of, thanks for sharing that up, because I was just picking one up out of my head. Then you've got a huge amount of different microbes being fed. You got the diversity in the soil, then you end up with that diversity in the soil. You end up with more moisture being held there and more mineral, because it's the microbes in the soil that actually make minerals available for, the plants, and then it can move on. And really a big one is, absolutely minimize soil disturbance. There's still way too much tillage goes on up here, and then soils are left bare. If you can actually, yes, a lot of soils are quite compacted from machinery already. That's, rotary hoes are shocking for the soil. They will pulverize it to a dust, and then as it's running over, it leaves this compact layer underneath, and you'll end up with this hard pan layer down underneath where the rotary hoe is. And so you may be getting a land that has, all the top's been pulverized, and you've got this compact zone underneath where there is not even air or water or anything can penetrate it. And so you may have to come in and run a deep tine ripper through it just to break that compact area up. It's like cracking an egg to make an omelette. You might have to, you have to crack the egg once, but that is it. You don't want to be continually going in there cracking the egg, or you'll have a omelette full of eggshell.
I think the other thing is, one of the most notable thing in regards to soil disturbance is it decarbonises the soil itself. It exposes all the root matter, and it just breaks down to rubbish. We
you
have
lose
seen
the carbon to the atmosphere, and you kill all the soil life in the process.
So it has two problems. It disturbs the soil and breaks down the microbes that are doing the good there, and then it also can turn to a bit of dust bowl for a period of time. But we have made advances, especially in broad scale cropping. There's a lot less tilling, and especially with the seeders that these days they drill and put individual seeds in the hole, so they're not disturbing the soil, and it also leaves a lot of the normal native grass or the current grasses in place, which helps keep the moisture, and also it helps keep a barrier to other weeds. So one of the first things people would notice when they dig, say, a garden patch and turn it all over like they're supposed to, the first thing that pops up is weeds.
Because
I presume using this method in big, broad-scale cereal crops with the drilling method sort of helps cut down that, and would obviously cut down herbicides and that sort of usage, which also. So we are learning, but it's probably a slow process, and then we've got to get people like yourself to be able to put the message out to the whole field in regards to they can pick some of these aspects and integrate them into their current situation, because we probably can't expect someone who's going about their farming in a certain way to embrace the whole lot at once, but maybe it's an incremental sort of model that they can use.
Yeah, totally. And just embracing principles within regenerative and using what you do already have, the best way you can, using the best practices that are possible. The beauty that I have seen massive effects with trees in landscapes, whether it be for cattle or anything. If you see a drought anywhere, you see trees, that's the only spot that's green, is right underneath those trees. There's landscapes I've seen everywhere, photos of this. And we see it even, I showed one even at the meeting in Cairns of the boundary of our property, right where the trees and all are. It's as green as you get the next door neighbour with no trees, everything's dead.
The diversity factor to come in after that, with broadacre farming and even orchards and things like that, they're fairly large scale, and they tend to keep to one major crop, and then maybe smaller amounts of other supplementary fruits.
The beauty about diversity, I think, is you can still add even if it's having 5 different species in there as your main area, then you as a farmer, you can have your cover crops running in there. You can have cattle running in there between the tree runs. Then you can also have other crops that would back you up, say if like a year that's just happened on avocados, which we could already foresee happening. The avocado prices for the next few years might be pretty dismal. And then imagine if we've got an avocado grower up at Caban that integrated turmeric and ginger, bananas with his avocados, with in his region eucalypts to chop and drop. That effect there, now he's already got a diversity of incomes that he can quickly shift or change his set of cards with, and say, well, this year I'll prune my avocados. Since the price is crap, I might as well prune them and get the money out of my ginger, turmeric, everything else.
With having, the other thing about having a variety of crops, although it gives you that diversity and other market sort of thing, does it become more labour intensive in regards to what you need to get an income? Like, because you have so many acres of this, so many acres of that, and they're all integrated, the harvesting and collection of them, is that a little bit more of a harder task, or is it just something you need to integrate planning with to make sure you can pick the crop when it's ready and have a market for it at the same time?
Yeah, if you're growing a good enough product, the market is already there. We're getting the highest dollar at this moment on our bananas because the quality is there. The same as with our ginger, our turmeric. The harvesting of it that's why I love to be an actual practitioner, because I've experienced it, and then I can share my experience and what happened on my block to other farmers, and say the turmeric and ginger and that, with the chopping and dropping of the mulch down on top of it, you don't actually have to dig them, which really surprised me. So then I don't have to have machinery to dig them up. They're actually all growing up into the mulch. And as that mulch broke down, by the time I went through to harvest, I went, look at this, I just have to go and pick them up off the top.
You just made me think of something my father showed me years when I was only a kid. He got a 44-gallon drum, and he basically filled it full of straw and just a bit of light sprinkling of soil, and put potato peelings in it and sort of watered them. And the potatoes kept growing through the 44-gallon drum. And so by the time you harvest, you've got this couple of plants, but you had this whole root system going right down to the bottom of the 44-gallon drum. And it was like, they're all clean. The big thing was that they're all clean. The skins didn't have much dirt on them at all, because there was hardly any dirt from being in straw, but they're healthy as anything. And it was a huge crop for one 44-gallon drum sort of thing. I don't know how many. I was probably a bit young to realise what the sort of volume is, but it just kept going and going and going. But whereas you had a spud in the garden, it's only got to grow maybe 4 or 5 inches under the soil or whatever, and that's all you got to harvest. So they might run out a bit, but this was sort of incredible. So there are amazing things we can do, but it takes innovation.
Yeah, and it just takes to think about things. A lot of it's got to do with our mind patterning. It takes something to come along and interrupt our mind patterning, oftenly, for us to change. We don't often, us as humans, don't change well unless something comes and interrupts the pattern, because we're so used to pattern to do something a certain way. And potatoes was an interesting one when Neighbour came over. It was one of the teachers from Brazil. And he was looking at Australia. He said, why are you growing potatoes in soil? And I said, what do you mean? He goes, we grow them in the mulch, and then we don't have to dig them. They're already there.
Oh, maybe my dad was ahead of his time. I don't know. But I just thought it was interesting.
Just the way we think of things. Yeah, we've just got to change our patterns and change. Yeah, our patterns, the way we do things and open up to different possibilities. And, even if a grower just takes a small risk, does at the most test it with an acre and then tests a few things there. So it's a small risk on research for his benefit. Then he can integrate it safely then throughout the entire farm.
What role do you think Hawes and Woolworths plays in how agriculture is run, especially into food products, for fruit and veggies in particular? I mean, going back before Coles and Woolies became the powerhouses they were, I remember everything seemed to go to the wholesale markets. Like I spent a bit of time in Victoria, Vic markets, and then there was a big commercial wholesale fruit market in Footscray. They were huge. Do you think what Coles and Woolworths are doing play a detrimental part in this whole program, only or sort of basically committing growers to give them just one particular crop at one particular time? And do you think that's a problem that we need to sort of get around?
Yeah, I think they've done more damage on farming than I've ever seen. What they do is they put growers into contracts. We had an issue up here because my husband was a Chamber of Commerce president when the Cyclone Larry happened. They wrote contracts with the growers, and because the growers, even after a cyclone, couldn't even supply, they actually were fining the grower every week thousands of dollars for not supplying Coles and Woolworths. Coles and Woolworths were actually fining the growers for it.
Usually, isn't there some sort of clause in supply contract that sort of protects you against sort of natural disasters and something? I can't remember its name, but I think it starts with an M or something, but it's usually in a contract where something unforeseen, though, like a godly event sort of thing, like weather, you actually get some sort of relief from the terms of the contract.
Yeah, well, it wasn't happening. And we then had further meetings with Bob Catter. Peter Crosgrove actually came up and assisted with us with the growers to actually halt what Coles and Woolworths were doing to the growers. It was a massive battle, but we won that battle eventually. But, even still today, Coles and Woolworths lock people into contracts for minimal price. The price they pay the grower is absolutely disgusting for what is sold on the supermarket shelf.
I suppose under the old system, people, farmers and that had to go to the wholesalers, so there was a middleman. And I suppose some people thought the context is, we're cutting out the middleman, we're going straight to the retail outlet sort of thing. But obviously, for things like milk and foodstuffs, vegetables and fruit, it hasn't really panned out too well for growers, I don't think.
No, it hasn't. And I think we need to think local, support locals, your local co-ops and things like that, because they're the ones that are actually paying the grower a fair price. They're the ones that are going to be there in the end when, anything unfolds, they're still going to be standing. Whereas, Coles and Woolworths, if they suddenly a flood or anything, or even just this latest, COVID cases and things like that, you see supermarket shelves empty. I think we really need to support our local businesses. Yeah, well,
that is fairly noticeable. And I think most of the audience here would attest if they go into, particularly Coles and Woolworths up in Cairns, because we're on the end of the supply chain, maybe it's just that. But there are times when the shelves look a little bit on the thin side. But just moving on to another point, keeping the soil alive all year round, if we can just touch on that. What's the essence to that?
If we can keep a living root in the soil at all times, that plant is always photosynthesizing, or especially diversities, whether you're using cover crops in the interim or, any method that you can keep living roots in the soil, then you're keeping soil alive, because those plants are photosynthesizing, feeding up to 70% of actually their sugars and that from their photosynthesis down into the plant roots, and then excreting that to feed the microbes. So then you're getting constant feeding happening. Otherwise, you're going from desert to suddenly trying to recoup and rebuild the entire cattle underground, as we would call it. Feed the cattle underground. You know, there's more cattle under the ground in microbes in a teaspoon of soil than there is above the entire Earth's surface.
I think one of the other things too, a lot of people don't quite appreciate for vegetation, especially things like grasses and that, how much of the plant is actually underground compared to what's above the ground. And I think in a lot of cases, it's up to 70% of the vegetation matter is in the ground with the root system.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of having diversity there. That's what I have really been very impressed with, having, like, even a banana grower. When you see a cyclone come through and bananas are just flattened, because bananas have got a minimal root system in the soil. They're a herb. And in my systems, I've had the eucalypts and everything in there with them, right in the same hole as the bananas. And a eucalypt has got a 10-meter and more even root
circumference
coverage, circumference. So that's a massive foundation to support the banana, where I didn't lose my bananas in these last, when we had that cyclone, and also when we had the big hailstorms that ripped through. I was like shocked. I was like, wow, because I came out thinking, oh my God, what sort of mess am I going to find? And then I was like, holy wow, this is huge.
The canopy cover of the large trees probably gave some protection.
It does. It holds the wind, pushes the winds up and over, holds them above the canopy on the bananas. So it just allows a little bit of filtering through. But also down below ground, they're doing a huge, anchoring to hold the bananas and that up.
So I think the last point is integration of livestock. Now, I have pulled through some of the images and that of the various applications of livestock, and I saw an interesting one there where I think it was a chicken caravan, and what they were doing is the roost for the chickens was on wheels, and they'd just take it to different parts of the thing. So they moved out through and foraged through the whole thing. But when they came and had a overnight stop and all their domestics, it all fell into the local area, and they weren't saddled with things like just having a permanent hen house where you had to scrape up the manure. They were actually distributing across the landscape in their farm. So that was fairly interesting.
Well, we're very good at making an awful lot of work for ourselves as farmers. Oftenly, when we have to clean out the coop house or clean out the
pools,
wherever the animals are, and even when we're looking at fertilizers and stuff like that, we make a huge amount of work for ourselves that's actually not needed. A cow is a beautiful integration, as well as chickens in a landscape. A cow is basically a compost machine on legs.
I suppose we'll move on to Syntropics, but I suppose because Syntropics comes from the foresting type environment and had smaller animals, they obviously, you're not going to have cows running around dense forest sort of thing. They sort of don't go well for that. But things like pigs and other types of animals, smaller animals, they can be well integrated into that fairly closed environment, whereas the cows can have to have a bit of a wider gap between the vegetation. So I suppose there's horses for courses, and you'd have to be fairly selective on the type of animals depending on what you're trying to achieve especially in a dense, compact area.
Yeah, but the beauty of it is there's no singular recipe. Say if you're doing cattle, you could have, say, 10 to 20 meters of grasses and cover crops between the tree rows. And so you just widen the distances up, and then you've got, the beautiful thing about it is then you've got the trees can act as already, on one of our growers is actually doing that. The trees are actually as his living fence posts. So he never has to replace a fence post. The cattle are strip grazed using holistic grazing because you've already got the strips there ready for the cattle to walk through. And the grasses actually stay greener. They stay higher in protein because they're not getting stressed. So the cattle are actually eating higher quality grasses, and they can rest in the shade. They're happy. And same with chickens, pigs.
I suppose the thing is, where people have got large scale farms and that, they can make it suit the area. So like you say, we still have our cattle and we have wider tracks and things like that. And if you've got a smaller scale farm, well, then you don't have the cows, you have another diversity and another animal. So it probably, basically nothing there preventing someone who's already got a small or large scale property integrating some part of this into their system.
Yeah, totally. There's so many different systems that we've been creating. The Ernst's team have been creating in Brazil, from sugarcane, where they need to still use the machinery and trucks to harvest the sugarcane. So they've got 20-meter widths between their tree runs, to cattle. McDonald Farms over there is one of the largest beef producers. So Ernst designed a system just for the cattle. Chickens, pigs, you name it. It's endless. That's what I really like about it, how to integrate this through all farming models and all. It's not a recipe, so it can be integrated in any kind of climate. It's just having a look at what the pioneer trees of that environment are, and then how do we utilize that, and how do we do best management practices?
Just going on to Syntropic Agriculture, I've just got a couple of screens here. It was, because I read a few different web pages in regards to syntropic farming or agriculture, and it was fairly hard to get a easy sort of definition or description of it. And this is probably the best one I could find. Syntropic agricultural farming is a type of regenerative agriculture developed by Ernst Gosch that focus specifically on foresting the planet. It imitates natural regeneration processes of the forest, enabling people to create dynamic, successional and economical viable ecosystem that restore degraded soil biodiversity while integrating them into a productive agricultural food source. I think that's a reasonable paragraph to sort of describe it without all the other bits and pieces going to it.
Yeah, totally. That is a good paragraph. Essentially, every different plant has a different light requirement. And so we actually call ourselves light farmers in a way. So that's how we can actually integrate all the different crops. Once you understand where they came from in the forests, integrating all the different crops, and then any plant is not actually under stress any longer because it's in its own protected environment from the sunlight, from depending on what the plant's requirements are. And so this is why we don't get the pests, the diseases, because we'll only even get sick if we get usually stressed. Stress is our biggest disease. The word disease is good on its own. It's called, we break it up, it's called dis-ease in the human body. And stress is the forefront of that one to cause any dis-ease. And it's the same with plants. Any dis-ease in the plant is usually caused by some stress that is occurred to it in sunlight, exposing a plant to get sunburnt or not have enough sunlight, actually then disease is the outcome.
I'll just move on to another screen. This is basically the founder of Syntropic Agriculture, Ernest Gosch, and he's a Swiss farmer. Now I can't see anything more removed from Swiss farming methods to being in Brazil, and that's basically where he sort of developed his interest in that, to integrate many things into the forest environment to sustain agriculture. And there's a number of practitioners around offering courses and expertise on that type of agriculture.
Yeah.
And you also run courses as well.
Yeah, we do at home.
I think there's people down in Noosa and there's other people around that are involved. Is there actually a network of people? Are you talking to other people all the time in regards to this agriculture?
We're all working together for the benefit of the outcome, the best outcome for within Australia, like other teachers such as Tiago, Victor, Scott Hall. They can look up, syntropic farming, and they'll find numerous outlets. Yeah, and this is really starting to make some big changes in Australia, the way we do agriculture. So, I mean, even Ernst Gosch, Ernst Gosch, it wasn't only just a Swiss farmer, he was a genetic scientist. His role originally was to genetically modify plants for these changing environments that's happening. Now, what a change to go. And that's what woke him up, and he went, well, hang on, why don't we get the plants back into their original environment? And so let's put a process together, an agricultural process that actually the plants are happier in, rather than having to genetically modify the plant.
Yeah, make the plants, well, they don't have to be more resilient because they're happy in the environment you put them in, because you made the environment for them. Yeah.
And as I said, at home, we've got the demonstration sites for avocados, citrus growers, mangoes. There's vine crops, there's horticultural crops. I've done a range of different setup demonstration sites, and we always welcome any grower that wants to come on and have a look. And I thought, well, you can't beat walking on, having a look and going, seeing is believing. I can see it happen.
I think one of the things there's also a number of farmers or growers on the websites who sort of adopted at least some of these things and talk well on the advantages that they've come across. We probably need to see more testimonials, you might call it, and before and after photos to sort of enlighten the general public to the advantages of that. Because I did notice, there's reference to certain farmers who have done things on their property, but like I say, we probably need to broadcast that more and make those pictures and those testimonials more readily available and broadcast out to the wider public.
Yeah, that's why I'm really happy with more and more growers taking this on, and that then just gives us more living classrooms happening out in the paddock.
And the thing is, let's face it, word of mouth and being able to come and see a real example close by always sort of helps, doesn't it?
Oh, totally, because for farming, seeing is believing. And
just share another couple of screens in regards to some of the processes they use, and maybe you can talk on those processes. This is obviously with a patch of bare ground when they start, but here's an interesting thing. This is, you might call it prunings, but they seem to be substantial pieces of wood that they've put over the ground. But is that the sort of thing you're talking maybe they're a bit large, but is that the sort of thing like pruning you're talking about, to use those prunings to integrate into the soil system?
Yeah, totally. When we prune ours down, we put them down in, about 50 centimetre lengths, and that will actually feed and build the fungal growth in the soils over a very long period of time. The smaller stuff we just chuck straight through, run the wood chippers through over it and spits it straight back over the top. So you've got smaller stuff, you've got larger stuff, and we've had incredible results with wood in the systems. There is scientific evidence on what they would call ramified wood chipping, using that especially for fruit crops and horticultural crops. That system there, yes, it takes time to set it up right at the beginning, but you would never, ever have to touch that again. You can keep continually replanting in that for years and years to come without needing to add anything.
I suppose the other advantage there, it would be, once it's sort of developed, it would be reasonably hard for a weed to get into your system, or it'd be pretty easy for you to sort of give them the boot anyway. But this is the same area some months, a month or so later. So that's a fairly dramatic change.
Yeah.
And I presume, the shots don't tell the whole story, because there's other plants and that behind it. But one of the things I noticed is they have this concept of varying height in the vegetation as you proceed.
It does happen that way, but the key focus is on light, not height. That's where it varies a lot from what I learnt back years ago and was even teaching on food forestry. So ours is all integrated by, and we talk about the light requirements of a plant. Say a lettuce, it's not a very high, as in height plant, but it has a high light requirement. So we really focus on the light requirements of plants.
I suppose the trick there is to make sure the plants that are the shortest are getting the sun, getting hit by the sun first, and the ones behind casting a shadow are gradually incrementally in height. So your lettuce are getting a good dose of sun, then something that's growing higher, that gets a reasonable dose of sun, because the sunlight's coming in mainly from that way. You wouldn't want it the other way. You wouldn't want to put your tall trees in between the sun and your lettuce, if you know what I mean. So there's also methods in regards to how you lay out these corridors.
Yeah, it's how you lay them out, and allowing the sun to pass over the system. That's why often we'll work as a north-south on our lines, so that the sun moves over the system completely, and you get a full integration of light happening throughout the system all day.
I suppose one of the things is it's like all changes. They're always people are always a bit fearful, especially if people have got an established practice. But one of the big problems we have with our current agricultural system and the seasonal fruits and vegetables and that is the harvesting. We'll only have these short windows of harvesting because we're all doing the same thing. So we need this massive influx of workers to pick the crops for just a short time.
Yeah.
Would changing to this system where you've got inbuilt diversity provide a better employment prospects for people to sort of, not that you probably want to be a professional picker all your life or something like that, but rather than come in big batches sort of thing, is that farmers are now growing different crops coming to harvest at different times. You can have a fairly steady workforce rather than up and down and up and down and sort of, oh, gee, where's all the backpackers or where's all the islanders, when we probably could have a more stable system where employed locals better, because there's more hours in the year available for work rather than just patchy pieces.
Yeah, totally. And then if you have a really, workers that you're really happy with, you can actually keep them employed all year long. And the environment that they're working in, because you're not then just picking one crop throughout the year, you're picking a diversity of crops. It's actually really enjoyable. I actually have backpackers that have come to me, begged me to work on my farm, that they said, we'll even work for nothing to work on a farm like this.
Well, let's not go down that track, because we might have the
No,
industrial relations.
the people really actually want to, and they're begging me to instead of say picking bananas all day every day of the week, they said, oh, can we just come and work on your farm? And I was like, yeah, isn't that interesting? It's actually pleasurable to work in this kind of system.
Well, now that we're sort of moving on to embracing 2050 zero emissions and all that, there's a greater emphasis of decarbonising the environment or our society. Agriculture is in a fairly unique situation where it's capable, managed properly, and take up some of this carbon. There's already carbon credits in regards to soil storing and stuff like that, although it's a bit iffy in regards to what's legit and what's a bit of a snake oil salesman proposition. So how do you see the future going in regards to in your type of operation? Is having some sort of measurement to show that you're being maybe even carbon negative?
Well, we work with David and Deborah have the University of Field Studies. They bring over students from Michigan State University and places like that. We've been really fortunate to have them working with us alongside of us, and us teaching their students, but also their students being able to do the soil sample tests, look at, what changes are happening. And so we've actually got that direct data there, thanks to the university working with us. And we've seen incredible changes in the soil profile, in the carbon in the soil, and the nutrients that are available in the soil, and without adding any fertilizer. Because before fertilizers ever happened, nature used to do this anyway. So we just have to follow the natural processes and natural systems and do it in a way that we can mechanize it and work with, our agriculture where it is now. And we won't be relying on anything that kills life. We won't be relying on fertilizers, insecticides, pesticides. Anything that ends inside is something that's killing life. So we no longer have to rely on that. And every farmer actually really wants to do, I think in his heart, right before the soil, he wants to improve his farm and be able to then hand that on and has to make money in the process. This is the beauty about this. And then hand it on to his children as an inheritance where they can be making money and getting a better farms as well. At the moment, a lot of farms that get handed on are quite, what's the word for it? It's a bit like pretty broken. It's a bit like getting handed a Mercedes-Benz with no engine left.
Well, we have seen a lot of particularly grazing land that sort of become uneconomical to run cattle and that in, being sold off and locked up. I mean, I think in New South Wales there was a property in Western New South Wales. I think it was about 157,000 hectares or something. That eventually got bought up by the state government and has just been assigned as a state park or something like that. Well, these things, a lot of people cheer these events on. The locking up of land isn't necessarily good if it's not managed.
No, they're huge.
Do you see a requirement, like there's a lot of NGOs that go around and sort of buy up this land and just lock it up? do you think even if you're not going to, if you're owner, you're still obligated to manage the asset? And I mean manage the asset is, keep your feral pigs off, keep the soil good, keep the noxious weeds out. It's not just a matter of simply locking up a lot of land and that makes you environmentally good.
No, that's where most of our disasters are happening, where lands are getting locked up, not managed then, and then we're getting all these feral pig outbreaks. They become fire hazards. Noxious weeds break out in there because no one is actually managing it. And yet, if you put the human in there to actually manage it, then we've got that human integration that cares for the land, and we manage it, appropriately, then we can rehabilitate those lands far quicker, and we won't have the fire risks that are happening and all those sorts of things. And Australia's been just through that, in the last couple of years.
I mean, while they point to climate change, but there is fairly good evidence, and there's a lot of expert opinion that some of the fires that were in the south east early 2019, a lot of that was exacerbated by the failure to manage those assets. Especially in native forests and that. Every time it lights up, if you got to run out there and put the fire out and pat yourself on the back, and you keep doing that for a while, eventually you have the situation that happened in 2019. All you've successfully done, yes, you stopped a fire in 2017 or 2015, but all you've done is allowed the fuel load to get up. So I still find it, this is where people, like Brisbane, like the state governments, are disconnected with their experts in regards to, we want to make 17% of Queensland state reserve or whatever, but 17% of state reserve not managed isn't necessarily a real great idea for the whole environment.
No, it's not a great idea for the whole environment. It needs management. That fuel loads and that get left like that, they shouldn't be on top of the soils. If we're actually managing them and increasing the fungal diversity and using cattle and all that kind of thing through those areas, we wouldn't have that fuel load. That shouldn't be there. That should be down in the soil, not on tops of the soils.
Well, we've seen things like, you can have excessive, access to forests by agriculture. There was a lot of stink in Victoria about using the alpine areas to let the cattle feed and that. One of the big song and dances was they broke up some of the riverbanks or something like that. But that's fairly short term. And the thing is, you can manage the number of cows and that going up there, and you can also manage then be here one year and over there the next year, so you can minimise that. But this mentality to the people of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne sort of thing, and their bureaucrats and their experts really have got this focus of getting humans disengaged from those environments, which seems fairly counterproductive in the long term.
Oh, totally. I totally agree. It's just then is a disaster waiting to happen.
But just on things like the noxious weed, state-owned property next to your boundary is probably the worst. Is the neighbour from hell, because he's not doing anything to keep the feral pigs under control. He's not doing anything to keep the noxious weeds down. It's just left. So hopefully we can sort of change those experts. I don't know how we're going to change the expertise that the governments of Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney rely on, but we really need to get those so-called advisors and the experts giving counsel, say, to the environmental part. We need to get them out of Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne and get them into Orange, Bathurst, Parkes, Mareeba and even up to the Cape, actually come come to better decisions making.
Yeah, because again, those that are making the decisions are totally disconnected from everything that's going on outside of their parliamentary building, and yet they're the ones making the decisions. It's nuts.
Well, I suppose a lot of the bureaucrats who advise have only ever lived in the capital cities, been to university, got their expertise in science and agricultural science at a university, but never actually been engaged in the process. So unless we fix that disconnect where the people who actually at least advising in these decisions, the bureaucrats, are actually get their hands dirty and have real experience, and also just go and live with the farmers in different areas, and for months at a time, and get some insight of what's the conditions are and what's being done and what's good and what's not good for that local environment. Because this one broad application of vegetation rules or something is not actually a good fit for every area. So I don't know how we're going to actually get them re-educated.
I don't know how you'll re-educate that. I think honestly, some of the best scientists that I would consider are some of the farmers taking on new, innovative, regenerative techniques out on their farms. They're the ones that some of the best scientists that are really happening. They haven't got this narrow focus. They're actually trying things new. And we've only really got quite a small mind in comparison to what the intelligence is of nature. If we learn to accept that we're not overly that intelligent, that nature has actually got most of the intelligence, we'll go a long way. I have a saying, the more I know I don't know.
I suppose the other thing is with the bureaucracy and that, how well do you think or what do farmers need now have to do to convince those bureaucracy and the government that they don't need more regulation, because they're changing the process and that, and these are the results that they're aiming for? Because it seems to me that they claim that all this regulation is there to save the environment, whether it's on land, it's the vegetation sort of thing for pesticides and land usage, or it's run off to the reef. What does the farmer have to do to stop being basically the whipping boy of the Department of Environment, and what does it have to demonstrate to them to sort of say, well, we're doing a good job?
As a farmer, I think the government needs to really wake up and consider that just putting litigation there is not helping anybody. It just splits this massive divide. And if they actually were really serious, they would get behind any aspect of regenerative farming and assist a farmer in any way possible to make this move forward. It's one thing to hand out, a drought relief, which people do need, but what if we handed out a package for them so the next time that a drought was occurring, they wouldn't be in the same space anymore, and handed out funding and education and work with the growers. They don't need a lot of litigation on this aspect.
I suppose the other thing is that it's the penalties are so harsh in regards, and the requirements to meet some of the regulations out there. You almost need to employ someone full time just to fill out the paperwork and satisfy the paperwork requirements before actually get around to actually growing anything. So.
And a farmer does not like that bureaucratic paperwork. You look at it and just go, oh my God, are you kidding?
I suppose the other thing, that while regenerative farming is employing natural aspects to improve the situation for the environment, even new technologies have their role to play. In regards to fertilizers and pesticides and that, we used to be a lot broader applications. I mean, as a kid, I remember hearing about the super bounty, you know, like farmers used to paid money to spread superphosphate, you know.
Yeah.
It didn't matter if they were growing crops or not, but they got a bounty for the amount of superphosphate they used, which is quite strange, but that was the thing of the 50s and 60s. We're advanced along now, and because there's no bounties or incentives, it's all cost. Farmers really aren't that keen to spend a lot of money on pesticides or fertilizers if they can help it. There's no real benefit to adding to your cost, if you know what I mean. So one of the big innovations that's occurring now, and especially in the United States, is nanotechnology. It allows, even for broad acre farms and that, to really reduce their fertilizer and pesticide use, because the application is so direct and its flow through the landscape is so minimized. I mean, you can get to a situation where you can put fertilizers down with nanotechnology, and they won't shift more than a couple of inches from where they are put. They won't leach any further before they actually completely break down to something harmless. So it won't really get into the water system. So is there a role for both, I suppose? And how do we get the big scale farmers to talk to the people like you to sort of, well, let's see if we can integrate all these things and come to a better outcome, rather than sort of like, you're right, I'm wrong, and all those sort of things.
That's the last thing that's needed. You know, we need to just support one another through all of this, rather than just going, well, you're right, I'm right, you're wrong. No one's right. There's no rights or wrongs. And what we need to do is just that slow integration of as many techniques as we can to regenerate the earth, regenerate our food system, so that as people, we are eating healthier food. Our food system, the moment, since the last 100 years, is degraded by up to 90% of its nutritional quality. Is it any wonder why we're seeing the high cases of diseases and that occurring now? Is we need to regenerate our entire food system so we are actually getting high nutritional quality into our food and into our people and onto the table. Then we will see less diseases occurring as well. And so we need to gently move farmers towards a direction of, and encourage them into this direction of movement.
And together.
Yeah, absolutely. We're a team together, and everyone works together with the best outcomes we can. And that's what I've got a great team up here. Adam Collins has been a biodynamic farm for 20 years and is on the team with us now, has been for the last 3.5 years, teaching as well. He's got a Bachelor of Science background as well, has a very good understanding of larger scale farming. And so, yeah, we're all hands on deck to help whoever we can to move farming into this direction of movement. You know, farming at the moment, the average farm spends 90% of what they make on agribusiness products, which is a huge, means he's really only, and I don't care how big money he's saying his gross profit is, he's only keeping some of them up 10%. Horticulture is keeping down, the figures coming out are down to 2 or 3% in their pocket. So that's an awful lot of work you've got to do to be earning 2 or 3%. And so if we can actually integrate models and methods so that they're not spending ridiculous, and price of fertilizer and fuel and everything is only going up. And so we need to integrate these other models to help one another move forward. And you actually keep more money in your pocket. When people actually ask me, oh, is it worth it? You know, what's the figures? And I said, well, it's about you as the manager. You know, you can walk into a good business and be a bad manager and the business will be bad. I've seen good managers walk into bad businesses and turn the businesses overnight into great businesses. So it's you as the manager at the end of the day.
We've just gone over the hour, but I just want to touch on one subject because regenerative farming and farming in general, with its good, puts carbon back in the soil. There's now a lot of talk in regards to carbon credits and those things, and selling the carbon in your, or sequestering the carbon in your soil and getting paid for it. Have you looked at that, or do you think it's probably a field that's probably fraught with problems and probably best left alone by most farmers?
I see it as a field full of plenty of problems. It's a field that large scale industries that aren't doing, say, oil, are doing oils and things like that, it's a way that they can write off their so-called carbon credits and look good again when they're doing their complete opposite thing. I think farmers really want to care for their soils, and you got carbon in your soil. You're going to store water, you're going to store minerals, you're going to store nutrients. It's a win-win-win. Carbon is your battery bank of your soil. It's like having your battery fully charged up, ready to use, in comparison to continually draining the battery.
We do have snake oil salesmen coming around at the moment, especially from the big techs, Google included, trying to sort of say, well, we'll pay you for your carbon in the soil. We'll give you, we say your soil takes seven tons of carbon per acre or something like that. So we'll pay you, 7 times whatever a ton of carbon's worth or whatever. And it seems fairly attractive. And that's an open secondary market system. And there's the one that's run by the government, the Australian government, where it's only traded internal, and that figure's a lot lower. But I think one of the problems people don't understand is you may sell and make, it's like when people decide to sell the co-op farms, for dairy industries and things like that. It seemed a good idea at the time, but then as time progressed, I think most dairy farmers have found it's not the golden goose sort of thing that is there. It's well and truly gone. But what a lot of people don't seem to understand is you might get the cash, but the thing is now you've got an ongoing liability, and it's an endless liability. In other words, at some time around, someone can come and measure your soil, and if it hasn't got the same amount of carbon or increased carbon in it, well, then you're responsible for either getting more carbon in there or buying other carbon credits. So, I don't know. Have you heard any scuttlebutt in the farming community in regards to the chatter in regards to this is something of the future we might be in carbon sequestration?
I think we're best to just wait and see and watch at this moment. Only fools rush into many of things like that. And yeah, it's taken a long time to be able to, for growers, they've had so many times to even trust another bureaucrat walking onto their land.
Have I got a deal for you?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, oh yeah, where's the shotgun? But yeah, farmers really, I think, it's profitable without even the carbon credits to getting more humus in your soil, when you don't have to spend the amounts on fertilizers and water and all these other costs that go with it, and you're getting healthier crops and better producing crops. Your profit's there anyway.
Okay, then. We've gone over the hour. If there's anything you'd like to wind up with at the moment?
No, I'm really excited about more and diverse growers. Mangali's, is also putting in syntropic plots. We've got beef growers and grain growers are starting. Some grain growers are starting. Balisado's chickens. Danny's doing it rows for his chickens specifically as well, and so that they can get shade and run through their runs. There's just so many diverse ways, and the more diversity and the more living classrooms we can have of this throughout the land, I think this will end up being I think it nearly will have to end up being the future of agriculture.
But the thing is, it's got to be inspired by farmers, not by bureaucracy. And I think,
totally.
And I think that's one of the things we really need is the bureaucrats to start laying off and start just focusing on what's achievable and what's good out there in regards to, and well, not their class of expertise, but the expert, because they don't recognise a lot of local farming expertise and experience. They sort of depend on the book learning type. So I don't know how
a lot of science doesn't actually apply to the land. You can study all you want on science and it has no application to the land. The farmer knows his land better than anyone else.
Okay, then we'll wind it up there. I'd like to thank you very much for your time tonight. I hope you enjoyed doing the show.
I did. Thank you.
It was a pleasure, and it was great to meet other people at the Columban Wild event. There's a lot of like-minded people. I hope you can tell other people about the show, and if you have other people within your area or community and that who have got a story to tell, please give them my details. We're only too happy to have a variety of people on because this is what the show's about. And again, I thank you very much for your time tonight. It's been greatly appreciated.
No, thank you for assisting and sharing the word out there, because we need to get it out there and we need to help anybody we can, and that's what we're here for. Thank you.
If you just stay on the air for a little bit, I'll just wind up the show for next week's. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, I hope to have Professor Richard Urquhart on. Now, Richard is a scientist in the agricultural field, mainly dealing in soil improvement, and has delivered a number of papers on the exercise. A bit different from Jane here, who has real hands-on experience, but he does have a lot of knowledge in regards to carbon in the soil and the new mode of going forward with these carbon credits, the good side and the bad side. So hopefully we can have him on next week. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.